Member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This bill, if it's passed, basically means the end of democratic civil society in this country. This bill targets the Australian Union movement, the right to organise, the right to come together, the right to vote on who you want to represent you. This bill tears apart that very notion. As the previous Speaker on this side of the House said, the Shadow Minister, this bill breaches international conventions. It basically will let the government and the Minister of the day dictate and decide who is a fit and proper person and who can be leaders of our unions. And the union movement, as Australian society, have every right to be sceptical of the minister having such power, given the contributions of the previous Speaker and I'm sure other speakers to come. The previous Speaker invoked and talked about something that happened at Oakey North, mine, which we have since discovered has not happened. Deputy Speaker, threatening rape of a child is serious. It is a crime. Raping a child is serious and a crime. It is so disappointing that those opposite, in a bill about integrity, would stand up here and cite rumour. Rumour. The Queensland Police have confirmed that they are not investigating this matter. Even the Australian paper, who is no friend of the union movement, has confirmed that the Queensland Police are not investigating this matter. Yet those opposite, in the pursuit of their politics, in the pursuit of this bill, will cite any rumour to sensationalise what they believe is going on. Now, I want to say a couple of things about the Oakey North coal miners, because I've met them a few times, them and their families. They are good people, hard-working people that have been locked out for 100 days because their employer, Glencore, wants to pay workers less. They are using labour hire, bussing them in to do these jobs. They are simply and purely trying to kill the town of Thierry, forcing their workers, all of them, to be drive-in, drive-out or fly-in, fly-out. I've met with the wives and the partners of many of the people working at Oakey North, people who love their town, people who are having surveillance and security officers follow them to their kids' school. The government's not talking about what's happening to the workers or the people who've been locked out at Oakey North. In this integrity bill, they're not talking about the behaviour of Glencore, the way in which they are bullying people. No. Instead, they use something where there's no recording of, which the Queensland Police aren't even investigating. And it doesn't end there. This government's hatred for unions and working people knows no bounds. You would think that a bill that was about ensuring integrity would actually mention trying to tackle wage theft, trying to focus on the shonky operators, the people involved in labour hire scams, the sham contracting, the cases of modern slavery that have been exposed going on in the horticulture industry, going on in food processing. No. This government is not interested in what is happening to working people, what is happening in some parts of our sector. Instead, the only thing that unites them is beating up on the union movement and on people's right to organise. This bill, the Registered Organisations Ensuring Integrity Bill, is everything but. It says that a fit and proper person test to hold office of registered organisations and the mechanisms from the office in which they will be disqualified. Coming from a government who, in their own Liberal Party in Victoria, have one of their former directors sitting in jail for fraud. Coming from a government who the Liberal Party's own opposition leader in Victoria is famously known for the mobster lobster scandal. Yet we're supposed to believe that they can bring forward any bill that talks about integrity. New grounds for registered organisations, mechanisms for placing registered organisations into administration. Again, you cannot fault the community for not being sceptical of this government when it comes to placing organisations into administration, and the new test by which they'll do that, because they organise protests, because they get workers together, because they dare to let off a siren and get on a megaphone to talk about the wage theft going on in their workplaces. This government seeks to shut down civil society in our Australian democracy, starting with the union movement. Democracy in our society exists everywhere. Football, netball clubs. Every year they have an election. School councils. It is a big part of who we are as a country. And for as long as we've had federation, we have had workers come together to organise, to have elections, to decide who they want to lead them. That is freedom. That is democracy. This government and these Liberal National Party members are so far away from that in this bill, they can hardly call themselves the Liberal Party anymore. I thought Liberal Party was about liberal individual rights, freedoms. This bill is everything but that, because it says to a group of workers, you don't have the right to elect who you want to represent you. You don't have the right to decide if you wish to amalgamate. We're going to introduce this new draconian system to stop you from coming together and organising collectively. For a group and a party and a government that claims to be about cutting down on red tape, that claims that they prefer small government over big government, this bill is everything but. It puts roadblock after roadblock in the way of people wanting to collectively organise and workers stand up for themselves. This bill also only targets largely workers. It does not crack down on wage theft, which is now not only a hashtag in this country, but a growing phenomenon. It does nothing to deal with the shonks, particularly those in the building industry. An example of that is what happened in my own electorate at the Bendigo Hospital. Asset Interior used a combination of visa workers to work on the building site, particularly in the plastering. There were workers that would come and go, 457, 417, people who are here not on a working holiday, on a tourist visa that just disappeared. The company went into receivership and then into liquidation. Small businesses in our electorate that supplied into them lost out. The CFMEU organised a protest out the front of the Lend-Lease office to basically say, Lend-Lease, you need to take responsibility for this, you need to clean up this mess. And after a few protests, the CFMEU said, OK, right, we'll sort it out. We'll pay these workers out. Some of them lost $16,000 in back pay. This bill doesn't do anything to correct what happened there. It doesn't do anything to stop this from happening in the future. Instead, what it does is it makes it harder for that union to protest. It makes it harder for that union to stand up for those workers who lost $16,000, who were working in unsafe conditions, those small businesses who lost money because this company went under. The CFMEU, because of the ABCC, is being pursued for holding these protests to ensure that these workers got what they were owed. This is the focus of this government. They will fine a union official who fails to give 24 hours notice $50,000 for stepping onto a workplace for a simple administrative failing to give 24 hours notice, but they will not go after the company. They will not go after the company that phoenixes. They will not go after the company that rips off workers. They will not go after the company that puts people in unsafe working conditions. Take, for example, what happened in Perth. A backpacker, she fell to her death. She didn't have the experience. When she signed up for the job, she thought she would do the traffic management, turning the stop slow sign. Instead, ended how many stories up without the proper training, fell to her death. On that workplace, the employer didn't even stop work. It took the ABC journalist calling the police to turn up for work on that job to stop. Yet this bill doesn't go after that employer, doesn't go after the conditions that the person fell to the death. No, it goes after the union that walked on site to say this work needs to stop. This is what this government cares about. Doesn't care about working people, doesn't care about your rights at work, doesn't care about workplace health and safety. They just want to stop any opposition to their government rules, any opposition for people who might speak up against their mates in big business. This bill does not crack down on the exploitation of temporary workers or modern slavery. This bill does not address the fact that we have guest workers that are here in this country living in the most unsafe, awful conditions, and it doesn't address that issue at all. One of the other speakers mentioned the HSU. Under current laws, the HSU, there was an issue within that union. That union, those people are going through our court proceedings as we speak. This bill wouldn't have changed the fact that what happened in that union and people inside that union stood up to that, and those people were dealt with through our current legal system that we have. This bill, though, doesn't help the Dorivik workers who've been locked out and now reinstated. People who work for Dorivik, a company that earns millions of dollars from the taxpayer. People here may have been to them. They are a blood collection, basically agency. All of the money that they make is essentially off the taxpayer from our pathology. People who work on a Saturday are paid $21 an hour to collect blood. They are going through enterprise bargaining at the moment, and they can't get a fair deal. Yet this bill won't help them get a decent day's pay for the work that they do. This instead targets their ability to organise. CFMEU, it's not just about what's happening in mining, it's also about what's happening in construction. This bill will not help all the unemployed construction workers in Perth, many who have been locked out of jobs because labour hire companies there are using 457 visa holders. It doesn't help them get a job back. This bill doesn't help the 700,000 workers who've lost their penalty rates. United Voice SDA members, people who work hard in hospitality, retail, pharmacy, 700,000 workers who've lost their penalty rates. This bill doesn't restore their penalty rates. This bill also doesn't help the Bupa aged care nurses who are fighting for decent ratios, the ANMF. This bill doesn't help ensure health safe standards in our aged care facilities, that you have enough nurses on every shift to ensure quality care for all of our aged residents in these facilities. This bill doesn't help them. This bill doesn't help the AMWU, the AWU and the ETU locked out workers at the Esso Longford plant. In a time when we're talking about a gas crisis in this country, in a time when we are exporting more gas, in a time when we have a real issue when it comes to energy prices and it comes to gas, this bill doesn't help those workers who've been locked out, who just basically do not want to accept a massive pay cut. This bill basically and fundamentally goes after the rights of workers to organise. It contravenes ILO Core Convention 87, Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organise Convention 1948. In particular, so far as Schedule 2 and 3 in this bill, where a union can be deregistered or put into administration because of certain actions taken by two or more officials. This is what this government's doing. This is something that you'd expect in countries where they do not have a proud history of freedom of association and democracy. This is what you'd expect from countries in Cambodia. This is not what you expect in Australia. In Australia, we have always had the right to organise, the right to stand up, the right to protest. This bill goes to the heart of that because it allows one or two officials, it allows a minister of the day, it allows an employer who doesn't like a bit of union pressure to make a complaint that could result in an organisation being deregistered. Fit and proper person, again, that is being designed by a government whose own Liberal Party in Victoria have officials in jail, whose own Liberal Party in Victoria are confronted with headlines like mobster, lobster, and the ongoing issues that they have. This is a government that doesn't really care about workers. This is a government, for all of their preaching, does very little to crack down on the real issues in the workplace, like wage theft, like breaches of occupational health and safety, like what is going on in so many of our sectors when it comes to stagnant wage growth. If you truly believe in a liberal society, in freedom and democracy, then you will vote against this bill because it basically is the is a big step towards destroying our democratic civil society that we've always been so proud of in this country.
I thank the honourable member for Bendigo.